Hey guys, and welcome to the third video in this multi-part series on how to study words for tournament Scrabble. In this video, we'll be talking about the two other words. Now, it may seem kind of weird to have a whole video on the two other words because we have 25,000 words worth of material to cover, and there are only about 100 two other words as we can see in this table. However, as it turns out, the two other words are some of the most important, if not the most important, words any tournament Scrabble player can know. And I can't stress this point enough. I highly recommend not moving on to any of the further rows in this table until you have a rock-solid mastery of all the two other words. Now, why is that? It seems kind of counterintuitive, since most tournament Scrabble players, whether new or more experienced, would have a first instinct of, I want to play these really flashy bingos and long words with a Z and a Q. I don't want to play these boring little two other words and score 15 or 20 points at a time. And that's a totally normal reaction, and I totally relate to it. But the problem is, even if you know all these really cool, flashy, long words, if you don't know the short words, you're often not going to be able to actually play them on the board. I'd sort of liken this to trying to build a tall building without first building the foundation. Basically, the tall building would be these bingos and these long words with a Z, and the foundation would be the short words, and in particular the twos. The problem is, even if you find a longer word on your rack, if you don't know the two other words, you're actually often not going to be able to fit it on the board, since unless you're playing through tiles already on the board, which is often not the case, if you want to play next to a play already on the board, you're going to have to make some short words in the process. So you're actually not going to be able to reap a lot of the rewards of studying the longer and flashier words unless you first know the shorter words. So that's why it's so key to start with the shorter words, and especially so the two other words. And I'm sure a lot of people are still skeptical, and I totally understand that. So I prepared a couple of example positions that I can hopefully use to demonstrate just why the two other words are so important. So let's start with this example here. It's very early in the game, and your opponent has started with the word polka, and you have quickly found the bingo of finance on your rack, which is awesome, but you now need to figure out where on this board you can play it. And it turns out there is a single spot on the board you can play it, and it involves making the two other word FA. Now, if you don't know that FA is valid, then you're going to be pretty restricted here in your options. As we can see in the list of choices on the left, the best play that doesn't involve making any two other words, it would probably be something like playing Confined through the O in Polka, which only scores 24 points. So you'd be losing 47 points, really just because you didn't know FA was a valid two other word. So even if you have great bingo finding ability, even if you find finance within half a second of seeing these tiles on your rack, if you don't know all the two other words 100% solidly, you're not going to have the confidence to play it, so it's effectively useless. A bingo on your rack doesn't actually do anything unless you can actually play it on the board. This next example is a little bit different. Here you're not going to be bingoing, but if you know the two other words really well, then you have a way to score over 50 points with your X. And in this position, it actually requires not knowing one or two, but three obscure two other words. And the way to score 50 plus points is to play the word XU over here next to chit, which scores 52 points because it gets the X on the triple letter score in both directions. You get XI horizontally, which scores 24 plus the X for the X, plus 1 for the I, which is 25. Similarly, XU vertically scores 25. And finally, UT horizontally scores 2, so that you get 50 plus 2, or 52 points for this play. And as we see here, if you don't know the two other words, your next best options are quite inferior. There are actually no other plays on this board that score more than 30 points. Now we have one more example here, again early in the game, and your opponent has started with the word expire. If you aren't familiar with the two other words, or looking for overlap plays, then you might look for a play such as Xenon from this X, which is a pretty good play. It scores 24 points, and it doubles the X, so that's not bad, but you can do a lot better. And one way you can do better is by playing Woo above expire, which makes three two other words. They all happen to be common two other words, we, ox, and op. And this is a better play than Xenon. It scores 8 more points and gets rid of the kind of annoying W. However, you can do even better than this if you know a few more two other words. If you happen to know that L, I, E, R, and N, E are all valid, you can go even further and play the word woolen, which not only scores 11 more points, but also gets rid of the duplicate ends on your rack. So this is by far the best play. So hopefully these examples have convinced you that the two other words really are the backbone of Scrabble, and that it's important to learn them. And if so, hopefully you're now excited to learn the two other words, but curious to know what the best way is to do so. What I would recommend is going to Zizava, that tool that we discussed in the first video in this series, and pulling up a new search and finding all of the two other words. The easiest way to do this would be just to add the length criterion and set the min and the max to both be 2. So as we can see in the bottom left, there are currently 107 two other words in the dictionary, and what I would start with here is probably just reading through all of these different words, and maybe since it's such a short list, taking a piece of paper on the side and jotting down all of the ones that you're not familiar with. Many of the twos are actually very common everyday words. For instance, add would be a very common word, am, an, as, at, and so forth. There's quite a lot of common words here, and probably by the time all is said and done, and you finish writing down all of the more obscure two other words, you'll probably only be left with about 50 or so. And once you have that, I would probably just spend some time reviewing that sheet over and over until you feel like you have a pretty solid grasp on them. And then what you could do is create a quiz for yourself on all the two other words. So once again, the best way to do that would just be to make a quiz and set the search criterion here to search for all two other words. I'll show another way to do it that's just as easy. You can use this anagram match option and then just do 2 blanks. And this will give you the same exact thing as the length criterion. So what you do now is hit OK, and you'll have this quiz on all the twos. So basically here, it'll show you the two others. Of course, a quiz is a little bit silly with two other words, since it's not particularly hard to anagram them. But I think with the twos, since there are relatively few of them, so it doesn't take that much time to go through them, and because they're just so important, it's nice to have the muscle memory of actually typing them in, and that'll help you clearly, hopefully clearly distinguish which ones are valid and which ones aren't. So for instance, with this rack, I see OY up here, and I see in the bottom left where it says correct 0 out of 2. That means there are 2 valid words with these two set of with this set of 2 tiles. Of course, there's only 2 letter combinations, so it's not hard to figure out what those 2 words are. It's going to be oi and yo. And then I would just move on to the next one. Here I see there's only 1 2-tile combination, so now hopefully I've read through the list and have at least some sense of what the valid 2 other words are, and I'll know whether this is IO or OI. And in this case it's OI, so I would just type that in, hit enter, and move on. I think this is a great tool, and Aerolith is also a really good tool for the 2 other words, just so that you can really see all of them at once, and also have that same muscle memory with typing them all in. So let me also show you how you might go about doing this on Aerolith. So once you've read through the list of twos, especially the unfamiliar twos, several times, and feel like you have a pretty good grasp on them, what I would do to really cement them in is go to Aerolith and create a new word walls quiz for yourself of all the twos. This is one of the pre-saved lists, so I would just go to Aerolith list and then select the twos and hit play. And once you get to this screen and hit start, you'll have this wall of words, so to speak, that hopefully should be familiar from the first video in this series. And basically what you want to do here is just go through this list of anagrams until you've cleared the whole wall. So for each one, it'll tell you whether there's 1 or 2 valid 2 other words in each set of 2 others. And basically, if I were going to start, I would just go with AA, and then with this set of letters, I know that KA is valid and not AK, so I'm just going to hit KA over here, and go on, so on and so forth. If at any point you're not sure, or if you miss one, then just leave it be, and then once you've either cleared this wall, it'll automatically finish, or once you've gotten all of the ones that you know, then you're going to hit give up over here, and then hit start again. Now you'll see it's showing questions 51 through 79 of 79. So there are 79 different combinations of 2 others that make a valid 2 other word. Of course, some of them make 2 valid words. And it only shows 50 combinations of letters at once. So you do have to go through this twice. And then once you're through all of these as well, then you're going to hit start again at the end. And as I discussed in the first video, this will quiz you on all of the ones that you've missed. So in this case, I only actually went through two of the combinations of letters. I'm not going to go through all of them in this video. I think you guys would get pretty bored. So you'll see that the number has dropped from 79 to 77 since I already got two of them correct. And basically what you want to do is just keep going through this process, and I would keep repeating it from scratch until you don't miss anything on the way through. Again, with the twos, it's super, super important to not only know all of the valid twos, but to be confident enough that you know all of them, so that if anyone plays one that's not valid, you can quickly know and challenge it off. Or when you're going through a set of candidate plays for yourself, you really don't want to be at any point looking and questioning, wait, is that two-letter word valid? You want to get confident with the twos to the point where any set of two letters, you know immediately what the valid two-letter words are. So yeah, I think that about covers it for the twos. That's how I would sort of recommend starting for systematic study. And the good thing about the twos is they all come up so often that if you just keep playing a lot of Scrabble, you're going to come across all of these twos sooner or later. So just the experience will pretty quickly, I think, get you familiar with which of the twos are valid and which of the twos aren't. But again, I can't stress this enough. They're the most important set of words for any tournament Scrabble player, and especially for newer tournament Scrabble players as they're starting out to learn. They're also the easiest set to learn because they're the shortest. So once you know the twos, then I think that will put you in a great place to move on to the threes and some of the longer words, which we'll be talking about later in this series. So that's it for this one, folks. I hope you enjoyed this and got something out of it, and I'll see you soon for the next video where we will be moving on to the next word list. Thanks, guys, and have a good one. Bye-bye.